All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone. And I'm Dave from Page 158 Books. And we are here tonight to celebrate the paperback release of BEARWALLOW, which is my favorite memoir, by the way, Jeremy.
Thank you.
You did a wonderful job of capturing the history of the mountain, but also the history of your family, which I really, really love. On there. Sorry about that. I don't know if that was me or not, but I'll mute soon. So Heather Bell Adams is here, friend of the store and wonderful author of The Maranatha Stone and the Good Luck Stone and the Maranatha Road. Sorry, I crossed them up. And she's going to be talking with her old friend Jeremy. So without further ado, I'm going to go away and you guys can chat.
Excellent.
Look at that. Let's see. Let me try.
Things have changed or haven't changed since it came out in hardcover. I'm excited to hear about that. And especially when I think, of course, page 158, those of you who are joining us, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a green bar that says Buy BEARWALLOW. And so that is a great way to support page 158, your independent bookstore. And of course, Jeremy with this paperback release. So that button is available throughout the evening. And of course, if you don't get to it tonight, then the store will have copies available just whenever, that thought springs to mind. We're coming up on a holiday season and books make great gifts, as we know, right? I will provide just a brief bio about Jeremy for those of you who are not familiar with his background, which is impressive, of course. So let me just read this out and then we'll get going with our conversation. Jeremy Jones's essays appear in numerous literary journals and anthologies, including Oxford American, Appalachian Reckoning, and the Iowa Review. Born and raised in the mountains of North Carolina, Jeremy earned his MFA from the University of Iowa and now serves as an associate professor of English at Western Carolina University, where he teaches creative writing and directs the Spring Literary Festival. Alongside Elena Passarello, Jamie is the series co-editor of In Place, a nonfiction book series from West Virginia University Press. So I thought to get us kicked off this evening, Jeremy, we could have you introduce the book in whatever way you see fit. I mean, I think we all have access to, the wonderful blurb on the back that sets it up in a lovely way. My favorite phrase is how we refer to BEARWALLOW as mystical and a peak in flux. So I'd love to hear more about that. And I'm also curious if you are able to share the background in terms of, what prompted you to write this memoir? When did you write it? I don't know that I've ever talked about that with you in terms of if you started it when you were at Iowa or when. And, if my math is right, which is the question, it looks like about 7 years maybe have passed since the hardcover release. Was it 2014? Or that's when you won the Appalachian Book of the Year. So I guess I don't know. It was around there anyway, right?
Yep.
There's some time has passed. That's what I'm getting at here. And
right.
I'd also be curious, your thoughts, and I'm sorry I'm throwing a lot of questions at you at the start, but how things have changed for you, for the mountain, for the area, from the time that the book was first released until now we have this beautiful paperback.
Yeah, well, thanks. And thanks for doing this. And thanks for the nice introduction. So I'll take the when did I write it question first, because it might lead into the sort of context of the book a little bit better. I mean, it's a hard question to answer, I think, a lot of times for a writer, is when exactly, like, what's the moment? Is it when you started writing? Is it when you got the idea? Is it when you decided it was a book? One thing that I realized, I think after the book was out, we've been living in Charleston. We moved back to North Carolina. And I'm not a hoarder exactly, but I do have lots of like I still have papers from college and stuff and Rubbermaids. And so, we were sort of moving those from one house to another, but I did look through them and I was like, maybe I'll throw some of this stuff out. And I found this essay that I'd forgotten I'd written in a class in college that was about my car breaking down and somebody stopping to help us. and I'll read that section maybe in just a moment. But I don't think I realized until after the book was out and I found that paper that in some ways I was writing kind of into this book. Then, as a like junior or senior in college, which I always try to tell my students that you never know what things you're writing now, the forms they may take or how they're kind of going to grow over the next few years. So in some ways, I think I was writing it in college, but it was in a very different form, part of my MFA thesis. And then I got out, realized that not every reader in the world was an MFA student, and had to kind of like reconceive of the book and restructured it and wrote it a bunch of different ways. But the book, I think, is about the places that we call home and how we fit in there, and if we can come back to them. It's that, sort of Thomas Wolfe question about if you can go home again. And so the book takes place over the course of a year, where I've moved from Honduras back to the community I grew up in Western North Carolina. And I take a job at the elementary school where I was a student and where all of my teachers are still teaching. And so the book is in many ways kind of following that year of it's like almost a time machine of like moving back to family land, going to my elementary school every day. But so much has changed. The mountains have changed in some ways. I've changed in a lot of ways. And so I'm trying to work out that question of if I still fit in. But a lot of the book, I think, is me realizing how little I knew about the place that I'm from. And my family has been in Western North Carolina for 2 centuries or more. And so I had some sense of the rootedness of my family, but I didn't really know much beyond how to get to like Bojangles and, where Main Street was. I just didn't have like any interest in that as a teenager. And so a lot of that year is figuring out what this place is in order to answer the question of do I fit in. So I thought I'll just read this section, which is pretty short, which takes place before this year that I'm talking about now. And this is when I'm in college. This is the essay that I, from that essay that I wrote and had forgotten about in college. And so I'll just kind of read this little section. At the time, we're living in Honduras, but this is recalling an earlier moment. A few years before landing in Honduras, Sarah, who was my girlfriend and now wife, and I had set out for my university for lunch one day. We stopped in the parking lot of a grocery store to get money from an ATM. And as we did, I noticed the hood of my rodeo coughing smoke. I pulled forward, the car jerked and stopped, the smoke a final sigh. I remember climbing out into that half-full parking lot and cringing at the irony of being broken down in my college town. Both of my grandfathers, with their bare high school educations, could likely have fixed the car, or at least diagnosed the problem. All I really knew to do was open the hood and look around. But I could talk about Faulkner and iambic pentameter. A man eventually stopped to help us. He hopped from his muddy truck with his 2 young children in tow. He bid us hello and immediately bent down, reaching in to touch the green goo pooling beneath my car. "Your radiator's busted," he announced, standing back up, wiping the green on his jeans. He sent his son to fill a jug with water next door at the bank as Sarah and I stood by the steaming car in the middle of a parking lot in the middle of North Carolina. "Where y'all from?" he asked. "Henderson County," I said, "farther west." "Oh, so y'all's mountain folk." We nodded, slowly, unsurely. "Mountain folk's good people," he said. Despite hailing from the Blue Ridge, I had never considered that inequalities could make me mountain folk, that geology had affected my personal characteristics or shaped me in any way. It seemed such a curious idea. If the land had marked me somehow, I didn't know how. I started wondering if others somehow knew me to be mountain folk from my walk or gestures or tongue. Was I good people because of plate tectonics? In Honduras, this voice, the voice of our good Samaritan mechanic, crept back into my head over and over. So y'all's mountain folk. In that foreign world, I easily spotted how the mountains rubbed those people. They'd been shaped by life in the highlands, and I heard it in their voices, and I saw it in their eyes. But I couldn't do the same with myself. How was I marked? How was I mountain people? How was I my people? So after digging in and planting roots on the edge of Gracias a Dios, Sarah and I decided to pack it in and return to the Blue Ridge. I took this job at Edneyville Elementary School. Sarah and I married and moved into a small house off Gillum Road, dead in the view of BEARWALLOW Mountain. So, in a lot of ways, I think that question of how am I mountain folk is the question of the book, a question that I'm not sure that I necessarily come to a clear answer about, which I think is sometimes the mode of memoir, is asking more questions than finding answers. But I think that's the sort of driving question, is how am I mountain folk? How am I part of this place?
Well, I think it's not so much about arriving at an answer maybe as it is that exploration. Right?
Yeah.
Both for yourself and for the reader, I think, and that comes across beautifully in the passage that you read, but also in the book as a whole, I would say. Yeah. And so for those of you all listening who don't know, I too am from this area. Jeremy and I did not know each other growing up because I'm a bit older. So we did not go to school together. But as soon as we realized, we were both from Hendersonville, I've been friends ever since because, we're good mountain folk. But so you and Sarah still live on BEARWALLOW Mountain today. Is that right?
We live in Henderson County.
Yeah.
You can see, if you drive down the road, BEARWALLOW from where we are. In fact, like through the woods behind me, which is all dark now, but like 100 yards through the woods is the headstone of my great grandfather, which I pass most mornings when I'm driving to campus, which is a weird, but also kind of, empowering kind of road to drive, I think.
Well, I was going to ask, how that makes you feel. I mean, I guess it probably depends on what you're doing that day and your current mood and so on. But yeah, what's that feeling like?
I mean, I don't know. I think I made a joke to my wife the other day because I realized we'd never gone to a high school reunion. And I was like, oh, we never did that. And she was like, we live at a high school reunion. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's true. Because I see people I went to high school with, like my dryer broke and I called up somebody to come fix it. And it was someone I'd gone to high school with. So there's that's strange because we were gone for long enough that people aren't totally recognizable, but everyone's a little bit familiar. I think what sort of terrified me as a teenager, like in my family land where I grew up, I take my dog there to walk most mornings. And from my great-great-grandparents' house, you can get up on the hill beside their house, look across the creek, and see the cemetery where everybody's buried. Okay. And when I was a teenager, that was terrifyingly claustrophobic. Like the fact that these people lived and died and are now buried for eternity on this one piece of land that just felt so small. Now, though, I think that's really, it feels right in a way that I think I couldn't have known if I hadn't left and done other things.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, as they always say, you see it with new eyes when you return, having been somewhere else, right?
Yeah, right.
It's funny. My sister still lives in Hendersonville. She went away for college, and then so I find that too. We'll be having a conversation, and she'll pepper the conversation with these names, and I'm really struggling to catch up. Right? I'm thinking, maybe that was the organist from the church or their daughter, but she's still so enmeshed with these people and the contacts. Oh yeah, that's so-and-so, the names just roll off her tongue just because she never stopped seeing those people.
Right. I think that I like to think that certain aspects of the book are wider reaching than just about sort of Appalachia, that these are universal experiences for lots of people. I watched Mayor of Easttown, which was like wildly popular, recently. And I felt like I resonated, even though that's set in, Pennsylvania in a very different place. I feel like that same kind of small townness, was very accessible for me. So I think, probably lots of people have these experiences in lots of places in the country.
Well, it's a good point that, mythology of place is not limited to any particular region. We talk about Appalachian history and heritage and what that means, but it applies a lot more broadly than that and kind of relates into this question of what do we as humans, as neighbors owe each other? What do we not owe each other? Where do I end and you begin and all of that? And I think you explore all of that through the book as well. Yeah.
So if you come back home and you like, there's probably a moment, I don't know how you come, if you're coming down Interstate 40 or something, when you see the mountains, is that feeling like settling? Is it sort of like, I don't know. What does it feel like when you see the mountains now that you're sort of coming back after being gone?
Yeah, I think it depends on kind of what we were saying about your drive. I mean, what's going on. If you're coming back for a joyous occasion, somebody's getting married or a baby's been born or something, there is the sense of being embraced and returning to the bosom of family and and celebration and so on. By the same token, it's difficult for me at the moment because we lost my father suddenly. I think you met my dad.
Yeah, I did.
Years ago. We lost him suddenly this past Christmas Eve. And so, I will admit the last few times we've been, it is a different feeling because it's almost as though I'm reminded of his absence. Of course, I'm reminded of it every day because he doesn't text me in the morning like he used to.
Right.
But yeah, because I think of it still as his place, right? And but he's no longer there to greet me at the door when I pull in the driveway.
Yeah.
So all that to say, it's complicated, right? It always is, because just as we experienced ups and downs growing up there, now as adults, perhaps the ups are a little higher, the lows are a little lower at times, and we're raising our own families. And it's very interesting, but it's always going to be home, of course. Yeah.
I just had so many experiences when the book first came out where I would be at events and meet people from other places who had moved here, and they would talk about, almost in these like sort of mystical ways, like the first time they saw the mountains, they just felt right, or they felt like they lived here, or they would always been called here. And I don't know what that is, or if it's just like pretty, it's just sort of like aesthetic appeal. But that was fascinating and something I hadn't considered. I kind of imagined as I was writing the book, I was writing to people who have complex relationships with home. But so many of the people I met, doing events after the book first came out, were people from other places who had sort of claimed, the mountains of North Carolina as home, and felt this sort of like before time kind of embodied connection to the place. And I don't know what to make of that, but there is something really interesting, I think, in our relationship to landscape.
Yes. Well, and the ability to which we're able to choose it. Some people aren't able to choose where they live. And you, in your situation, of course, we don't choose where we're born, but then you've chosen to return to it, as has my sister. So it's complicated. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I love the part in the description of your book where you talk about the digging through history and the family heirlooms that you found during the time period of the book, how the landscape itself was in the process of changing, but then also you're finding out perhaps new discoveries about your own personal family history. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, and I guess this is a question you asked, but I didn't answer, in terms of what's changed, since the book first came out. In the book, I write about, so my great-great-grandparents moved to the plot of land I was raised on, and so their house is still there. And as a kid, we always heard these ghost stories about it. We would always be down there. It's a noisy old house, so we'd hear pops and things. And so from everybody around me, there was always this story of that a man had murdered his wife, had chopped off her head, and the noises were her head rolling down the stairs. And it was just repeated so often and by like uncles and cousins that it felt like, I don't know, maybe there was some little bit of truth in there. So when I started writing the book, one of the first things I did was go to the Historical Society, and I started looking through all these things, because the story I had heard was that my family got it from the county because the county had seized it after, this man had murdered his wife. And I found no record of that. They had bought it from this family and it was just like a normal sell, and that was it. And so in the book, I write about that, about the sort of myths we have and why, we do that. In the last year or so, one of my dad's cousins who lives in Georgia unearthed this cassette tape where she had interviewed my great grandmother about lots of things. which was an eerie kind of experience. I knew my great grandmother briefly. She died when I was 6 or 7. But to hear her voice kind of come out of the computer, they digitized it. And she's talking about all kinds of things, like when my great grandfather's family came here and the prairie schooner they brought all their lives, like livestock with. And but at some point she starts talking about the murder. And it was the family before the family my ancestors bought it from. And talking about it in specificity, like he did this, he went outside and like hanged himself from this tree.
The perpetrator of the murder.
What's that?
The perpetrator alleged. Yeah. Yes, perpetrator.
Yeah, so he was so ashamed. I think it was the story that he went out and hanged himself.
And so she's talking about this just as though it's a done deal, matter of fact.
Yeah, because she said when my great grandfather's name was Albert, but she's calling him Bert. When she and Bert first married, they stayed there, and she was terrified with every noise in the house, and he would always tell her it was the squirrels or something.
It wasn't the
so
squirrels.
I haven't been able to go look that up, but there's a very good chance that the story was real. But in my research for BEARWALLOW, I sort of went as far as I thought I could, and then there was nothing there. So that's a new development. Someone may have actually been murdered there.
You hadn't listened to this tape at the time when you wrote it. Yeah, right. The historical record told you one answer, but then okay.
Now the ghost of Azalee Prestwood is telling me another. Azalee, wasn't that an interesting name? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the process of writing the book, which is why it was messy, and I think I'm a really inefficient writer, was just pulling up objects, finding photographs at my grandma's house and like digging around and learning a lot about history just through the sort of artifacts that were lying around my family's land.
Yeah. Well, so you referenced a little bit of the research that you did. I'd love to hear more about that and how you go about research for this type of project, which is, as we've, talked about this evening, both personal in nature, but then extends beyond, of course, your personal history.
Yeah. And I think at some point when I realized, like, the subtitle I wanted to use in the book that everybody nixed was a memoir of place, because I felt like a lot of the book was really about telling the story of this place as much or maybe more than it is telling about me. So I don't know that my research was exhaustive in a way. I mean, I think that writing creatively frees you up a little bit to pick and choose. But I kind of put myself through a course in Southern Appalachian history, which was something I hadn't taken in college or learned about. And so I remember being in the College of Charleston library and finding Bushwhackers, which is this book about mostly about Civil War soldiers who kind of abandoned their posts. And in some ways that opened up, the great thing about going into a library physically is that you see one book and then you realize, like, oh, this book 3 books down is really the book that I wanted, but I didn't know that until I came here and looked at it. Yeah. And I just remember like getting all these books off that one shelf and starting to read them. So a lot of it was reading books. A lot of it was asking questions that I never thought to ask before. There's a way, I think Dave was very nice to talk about the book as a family history kind of book. There's an interesting thing that happens when you tell your family you're writing something and you have a little recorder and you put it down. Like somehow something changes and it becomes more official, and sometimes that sets them, on their heels, and that's maybe useful. They tell you things they hadn't otherwise told you. So a lot of interviewing people and researching things. And a lot of it is just kind of like, the book kind of follows these threads of my own kind of research into the history, going to the elementary school, and then just like going into the land. So cycling and hiking and trying to kind of retrace the steps of people and figure out what that feels like and what it means to me now.
Well, so how did your family react when you told them you were embarking on this project?
I don't know if I told them. I mean, I don't know that I knew for a while that I was writing a book. I just knew that I was interested in these things. But I think
you just told them like, hey, I want to hear more about, the story you used to tell me when I was growing up. And
right.
Yeah.
And I think at the time, I first started doing a lot of that work. I was like 24 or 25, and it was just kind of like pat me on the head and say, sure, So I think that had some license just in being young and naive. Yeah, and I think they knew I was doing something with it. In college, I do remember, I don't know if it was an assignment or I just decided I wanted to do it. I did go for a class and like interview both sets of grandparents and ask them questions and use those to kind of write this essay. And I think in many ways I just replicated that in a like more global way. And so maybe I had primed the pump a little bit when I had done that work already, and they were like, sure, ask our questions. And for the most part, I mean, it's a weird kind of revelation that I think my family is bizarrely normal, which doesn't make for good memoir material necessarily. Usually books, memoirs are like I was raised by wolves or something, trauma or something.
I was trapped in the basement.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a sort of idyllic history. My family's like lived on this piece of land. My mom's family lives across the creek. They've all stayed together. They all stayed, in one place. They're pretty normal. So I think they knew there weren't really skeletons to uncover, except I did learn late in the game about an ancestor farther back who kept these coded sex diaries, which is the book that I'm writing now. So this one's a little different than that one. But I think in BEARWALLOW, it was sort of there were no guards to hold up because it's just a pretty, open, normal family.
Right. But so I remember you telling me about these sex diaries. You got help from somebody to break the code, right?
Yeah. I mean, the shortest version of the story is that the diaries are from like 1808 to 1859.
Okay.
But they were discovered in like 1975, just in a trash bag on the street in Wadesboro, North Carolina. But the guy who found it, this guy just found them, and they were about to level this house. And so some guy found them in these trash bags. He knew they were old because they're like hand sewn. It's 28 little notebooks. And he just refused to kind of give up. He would go to libraries and ask them what they were, because it just looks like hieroglyphics. It's just full of symbols. People were like, I don't know, I don't care. He, like, for 3 years, he would just walk around to places. And finally, this archivist in Raleigh, a state archivist, who had known an NSA analyst who had retired. And so he sent a few pages to this NSA analyst who had been a cryptanalyst. He'd broken codes for the government. And he broke the code in 30 minutes just from seeing a few pages. And that guy was just interested enough and retired that he spent 5 or 6 years transcribing 50 years of enciphered diaries. So when I learned about them, at the end of writing BEARWALLOW, they had already been transcribed. The cryptanalyst had already passed away. So they were there. It's just something I'd never known about. And now know way too much about.
Yes, now here we are.
Yeah.
Okay. So you said you are still working on this project, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost done. I think you get to a point in a book project where somebody else has to tell you that, but I feel like it's nearly there. I don't know what your experience was with your second book, but for me, nothing that I did in BEARWALLOW has been particularly useful in writing this book, except that I'm a little more patient. But I think the process of writing that book has been so unlike writing this one that it's felt like starting over. I mean, was that your experience, or do you feel like, I don't know if writing novels is kind of different?
I don't know. I do feel like every time it feels like you're starting over, and you have this, or at least I have these moments of, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to write a book. I can't do that. Just this belief that this is something that I'm capable of doing. But, certainly this project for you it sounds like, fairly different than your first book. I mean, still creative nonfiction, but
I've been calling it, and I've stolen this term from the writer Sarah Vereen. I've been calling it bioguar, because it's like partly biography, partly memoir, and kind of smashes the two together. Because it does kind of retell his life.
Yeah.
At the same time, I mean, the sort of gimmick or the setup of the book is that I'm reading my life through the code of his life and kind of using it to sort of assess inheritance and legacy and think about who I am today. So that's the setup, but it's taken a long time to piece it together. Lots of research.
Yes.
I know very little about the 19th century I mean, I know a lot now, but I knew.
I know a lot now, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, the War of 1812, that was a thing, and then I had to read about it, and I was like, oh, that was a big thing. There's a lot going on there.
Right.
I mean, your second book though was much more. I'm just thinking about the sort of historical thread and the movement through time, which was not something that was happening in Maranatha Roads.
Right. I had to do a lot more research for the Good Life. Yeah. World War II timeline, Pacific, nursing, all that was new to me. Whereas Maranatha Road, it was it wasn't about anybody I knew, but it was about the types of people I
right,
and the things that happen, So, I forgot to mention at the outset, for those listening who might have a question for Jeremy as we go along, there is a button at the bottom called Ask a Question. Isn't that convenient? So that is where you can ask your question. And you can also put it in the chat and we'll figure it out. But as we go, feel free to enter any questions there, and we will definitely preserve time as we go, as we near our ending time a little bit later for Q&A. And so anything goes, we'll go through those questions later and kind of see what's on your minds. Cause I know I have a lot of questions for you. We could, keep talking, but I want to be sure to give people the chance who have joined us this evening. Oh yes. Okay. Somebody said we need to make sure we have an event for the new book.
You got to get it finished.
We're going to finish it. We're going to sell it. We're going to do all the things.
Right. Yes.
With the new book. Do you have a title yet?
I'm calling it The Coded Life.
Ooh, I like it.
Because the book, in many ways, there's this code of the diaries, but I've just been thinking a lot about genetics and sort of DNA, in the ways we're encoded by our families, but also by our genes. And so I learned about the diaries right when my wife was pregnant with our first child. And so the book has become a lot more about fatherhood and kind of manhood in some ways. You can't write about an ancestor who's a sort of philanderer and not think about what it means to raise men, especially in this time. So I think a lot of it ends up being about what we pass on and kind of what we inherit.
What it means to be married, what it means to be a parent.
Right.
Yeah. Good. Well, that's exciting. So do you have books that you would consider to be comp titles for either BEARWALLOW or The Coded Life?
I mean, I think for BEARWALLOW, the books that I would like to be in, on a shelf with them and were really influential for me were Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, Annie Dillard's kind of Pulitzer Prize winning book, which was really kind of shaped me, I think, in a lot of ways as a young writer. I love Gretel Ehrlich's book, The Solace of Open Spaces, which is about her moving to Wyoming and really affecting, I think. I've never been to Wyoming, but it's a book that still works and kind of hits you.
Does it make you want to go to Wyoming?
No, I mean, it's harsh. She sort of captures the harshness, I think, of Wyoming. I have a colleague, though, who retired and moved to Wyoming, and I'd given her the book as she went, and she wrote to me later and said, like, this really gets it. So I think it captures that feeling.
Okay.
I really, when I discovered Wendell Berry in college, that was really important kind of discovery for me about going home and thinking about land and our attachment to it and our stewardship of it.
Yes.
So I think for BEARWALLOW, those kinds of books, not similar really, except in impulse, but I really love Rick Bragg's book, All Over About the Shoutin', which is his kind of retelling of his family's history, much like funnier and maybe livelier. I think my book is a quiet book and sort of meditative in a way, whereas his is really, kind of funny and but I think doing the same kind of work in terms of family history.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. The new book, though, I have been reading a lot of these kind of bioguar books that are blurring a couple of, 2 or 3 things. I think H is for Hawk is kind of the most successful of these kinds of books, which is, about falconry, but also about her own grief.
Have you read
really loved
Flights?
I haven't. Yeah, I haven't. Have you?
Yeah, it's really
Vesper Flight. Yeah, I think.
so the arc I read. Yeah, it's really good. The arc I read did not have chapter demarcation, so it was just this giant text file, which was a little disorienting. It's a kind of interesting way to read a book when you're not sure, wait, are we finished with that topic? And we've started, oh, nope.
Right.
Well, you know, it was kind of a weird quirk, but very good.
I read Carmen Marie Machado's In the Dream House as an advanced copy. I don't know if you've read that yet, but it has a section in the middle, which is like a choose your own adventure section. But in the arc, you know, there are no page numbers, so it says like turn to TK, and I'm like, wait, where do I turn? And so I just had to read it straight through, and it still sort of made sense.
Get the general idea of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the BioGuar form is a really fun one. My Autobiography of Carson Mccullers is another book that I read recently that I feel like is doing, you know, some similar kind of work to what I'm up to, I think.
That's been on my TBR. I haven't gotten to that one yet, but
yeah, it's good. I think it's a good one.
Yeah. Do you like Natasha Treadway at all? Memorial Drive?
You know, that's on my list. And that and the other book. Is it really good?
Yeah.
So many. I know it feels like there are lots of books, which is both like I just heard an interview with Victoria Chang on NPR today, which is about her new poetry collection. So different, but it's also about her. I think her parents had passed, and she discovered all their papers and all their stuff. And so as a way of making sense of her family history, she starts writing letters to them, but also to her daughters. And that's like both a thrilling and a little bit discouraging experience when you hear a book that sounds so much like your book. Like in my book, I have letters that are part of it that I'm writing to my ancestor. And so I was like, no, that's what I was doing. But then she was doing it so differently and so beautifully. She read a little bit from it. I think this was on NPR this morning or maybe yesterday. And it has text and image and all kinds of stuff in it. So that sounded like a cool book too.
I didn't know that part of yours was epistolary.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what I was saying about nothing.
How would I have known that?
I mean, the book has taken 6 or 7 different forms. Early on, I envisioned the whole book as a letter to this ancestor. Mm-hmm. That didn't work. And then it changed in a few other forms. And then I had a version of the manuscript that was me writing letters to my sons. This was like just after 2016. There's just so much happening politically. I'm thinking so much about like what it's going to look like for them. And then someone read it and they were like, yeah, this is a little too topical. And and it also, you know, I'm writing about this ancestor who's a really fascinating guy. Like he wasn't just having sex all across the 19th century. He also was keeping these astrological charts, and he, you know, could read Greek and Latin and was just kind of into everything, a sort of Renaissance man in some ways. And so
was he a farmer?
Yeah, I mean, the story of his life is a weird one, and I don't know the answer to this question, but he was born in the lowlands of South Carolina into a kind of planter status. So into, you know, his family had some money. His mom's family were the Cokers. And so there's, you know, a member of her family had signed the Declaration of Independence. And so there's some power and land and wealth there. Yeah. And for some reason, when he's about 20, he and his mom leave everybody else behind and move to North Carolina, leave his father, leave everyone, which takes him down a few pegs on the social ladder. And so he teaches and he farms, and then eventually becomes the surveyor of Burke County for a few years. But was doing his own work. So you don't know why they left? Is that no? I have some guesses. I mean, this happened in like 1813, 1814. So I think in some ways the War of 1812 might have been causal. Speaking of the War of 1812. Yeah. I mean, the weird thing about these diaries is that it's more like a log, like of what he did that day. And so there's no introspection or reflection. He's not pouring his heart out really. So I'm reading between the lines in a lot of ways, which has been kind of eye-opening for me, like what I want to see there, you know, and kind of how I want to see him. But his mother is like really encouraging him to sell his land as a young man. I don't know why, but I wonder if she just sort of knew that he couldn't, or, you know, I like to think maybe he didn't want to take over land that's essentially like trafficked, enslaved bodies working it, you know. No matter the decision, like I think it worked out better for me that he became poorer, but not a slaver. So I don't know why, but I think that some marital issues between his mom and his dad, and I think also his wanting to set out on his own. He was heartbroken. He's courting this woman for years named Mary Norwood, and she just will never commit. And so I think part of it is that, but I don't know. Yeah, I just don't really know why he left.
Well, interesting.
Yeah.
So, you've got all these different really interesting projects, and I know you are a prolific essay writer as well, standalone essays. And I'm wondering, do you have any advice if we have any listeners who are interested in writing nonfiction themselves, or perhaps advice that you give your students?
I think that, I don't know. I tell students that I feel like of the genres that you might learn in a creative writing class, that poetry and nonfiction are often a little more in common, because all you need to write an essay is a question, a sort of nagging question. And I think that mode of inquiry where you're trying to figure something out is often why people go into poetry. And I think that shows up in fiction in a very different kind of way. And so I think the best thing for an essay is a kind of obsessive inquiry. You just need to know something. You want to figure something out, but you might not get the real answer. That like the process of exploring it is going to be illuminating, but there may not be, a bold answer at the end. So that's it for me, I think, in terms of propulsion, like having something that's sticking with you and you keep asking it, and finally you just need to start writing it. In terms of how to do it, I mean, I don't know. I think for me, what's really, I don't know that I'm going to recommend that anyone out there goes and buys Montaigne's huge tome of a book from the 16th century, but there's something really empowering about him taking any subject in the world. He has got essays on thumbs and on valor and on smells, any subject in the world, and just like writing his way through it and not feeling like he needs to be an expert or come to an answer. And so I think that kind of meandering quality that an essay can take can be really, I think, freeing for people. So just to like take your idea and follow it through and not worry yet about where it lands. Because that comes later. I think that comes in the revision and all of the work afterwards.
It's good advice. Have you read, there's a craft book called something Meander Spiral. Do you know the craft book?
No.
I'll have to look it up. It has Meander in the title. So when you say Meander, like, oh, Meander.
Yeah, I'll make a note of that.
Meander, Spiral, something. Anyway, but so then, yeah, as you say, a lot of the shaping work happens in the revision process, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the one thing that I did learn from BEARWALLOW is that I'm a visual kind of map maker of projects. And so over the, there we go, Meander, Spiral, Explode.
Ooh, there we go.
Good job, Dave. So over the, during the pandemic, I have this writing space that I rent, and in it, no one really comes in there. It's just my space. So I have all this stuff stuck on the walls, kind of like mapping out the project and things, connecting everything. But during the pandemic, I wasn't going into that office at all. And at some point, the fire marshal had to go in for like their yearly whatever assessment.
Right.
And I know I wound up on some like list, some governmental list, like could this guy be a serial killer or something? Right. Because to go in there, it looks just chaotic and terrifying. But I have to put things up. I think to get a sense of the shape, to sort of see where those connections are. What interests me most, I think, as a writer, are the unexpected connections where there are things that feel dissonant or feel kind of even, unrelated, and you realize there's something there, something in between them. And sometimes I have to just put those up to see them,
So you're literally taping papers up to the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I don't know what this is going to mean for the next book. For BEARWALLOW, I had just a pegboard and I had stuck things up like quotes. This one, though, I had taken over the whole room with the giant like white pages that you have in meetings and had written on those. So if that trajectory continues, then I guess my next book will be a whole house that's like,
have like
I don't know,
city block or something.
Right. Yeah. I don't know.
If anyone, I'm just going to remind y'all, if you have questions, to put them in either the chat or the ask a question, because I'm just rattling on and I don't want to miss anything, but I don't see anything currently. So Oh, wait. No. Okay. We're good. We're good. We're good. And so you teach creative nonfiction at Western, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Other topics as well, or is that your focus area?
That's been most of it. I teach some kind of introductory creative writing classes that are fiction and poetry and nonfiction. I teach some magazine writing, which feels a lot like the nonfiction class, just a little more purposeful and maybe lucrative. And so I teach that occasionally. But yeah, it tends to be a lot of nonfiction workshops.
Excellent. Well, good. Yeah. Well, so how has it been working with Blair? I guess when you had your hardcover come out, it was John F. Blair. Is that right?
Yeah.
Then they merged with Carolina Wren, and so now we have Blair. Was the plan always to have a paperback release sometime after the hardcover? Or?
Yeah, I mean, not to get too inside baseball, but my original contract made John F. Blair not want to publish the paperback, and then once Blair became Blair, they were willing to kind of work around some of those contractual issues to make it happen.
Nice.
Which I'm really glad about. Sort of the normal timeline is that the paperback comes out a year or so later.
No, I was so happy when I saw the news that you were getting the paperback release, and I mean, it's a book that deserves to continue to be out there and talked about, and so it's really nice that happened. Yeah.
Yeah, but I appreciate that. I think Blair's a great press. If anyone doesn't know them, they're an independent nonprofit press who are putting in the work. I mean, they're publishing so many important books. I feel like right now, and they're good people.
Yeah, I recently read The Baddest Girl on the Planet, which of course, have you read that one yet?
No, I haven't read it yet.
It's by another Heather, so we have to Heather unite. But it's very voicey and very entertaining, and it really just sucks you in from page one. It's terrific. But yeah, I really feel like Blair's doing so many interesting things. They have I got a short story collection recently from them. What Makes You Think You're Awake?
Yeah.
A great title. And it's got that great cover with the kind of blinking eye. So good.
I mean, the cover of my book has been the thing that people comment on more than anything else. I'm really thrilled with that. One cool experience for me has been that as I'm writing this new book, a lot of the work has been in archives. And so I reached out to someone at the State Archives, and I found on the list of staff the designer for this book, who now works for the State Archives. So I was able to reach out to her and talk to her about my current project. She gave me some really useful answers for where I can find slave records from 1833, which is what I was trying to find. But it was just a cool, serendipitous find that here's this. I had never met her before, never had a chance to thank her for the book. But just this year I was able to connect.
Yeah, who knew? Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think that we are drawing near the end of our time together. I will remind people to click on the buy button if you're interested in getting a copy of the book. And I'll just wait 1 second to make sure I don't miss any questions, because I want to make sure people have the opportunity.
And if you're hesitating to click on the button, it's important to know that I think it also goes to Heather's books. So you'll find them all there. So even if you're going to skip past BEARWALLOW, you'll find more books behind the button.
Yes. Page 158 always has all the books anyone needs, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, this has been so much fun. I feel
thank you.
It's been a while since you and I have gotten to chat about anything, really. So it's really nice to see you. And hopefully next time we'll be able to have an event together in person, and that will be fun also. But in the meantime, we're just grateful for everyone who was able to join us online and celebrate your paperback release.
Thank you. Thanks for doing it. Thanks, everybody.